Hey y'all, my name's Alex and I'm 17 years old. I want to tell you my story. The thing is, I'm not quite an ordinary girl. I have some hobbies that are pretty weird for a girl to have, and I live a really incredible life in general. It's all thanks to my dad, who I love dearly. You think you want to know what happened to me? Well, how about you subscribe to the channel, and then get ready to be surprised. My parents had already had a daughter, my older sister, Alicia. So, when mom got pregnant again, dad really wanted it to be a boy. And I mean, no wonder. Alicia and mom were best friends, and they had a lot of common interests. Meanwhile, dad had no one to share his love for manly hobbies with. That's why he dreamt of having a son, so he could teach the mechanics of car engines or how to fish and climb trees. But he was in for some disappointment because instead of a son, he got me, another daughter. And of course, he'd already bought all sorts of boys' toys and was thinking about how he would raise a son. Such a bummer, right? Well, that's when he decided he'd fulfill his dream anyway. So what if I was a girl? He could still raise me as his son. I wore boys' clothes, played with cars and Lego bricks ever since I was a kid. When I grew up a little, dad brought me to a judo club, and they taught me how to beat guys that were taller than me. We also often went fishing together. For my birthday, he gave me an old and broken motorcycle. He taught me how to fix the engine in our garage, and within a week, I was riding a motorcycle I'd repaired with my own hands. I was dirty from top to bottom, but I was pretty happy with myself. You're probably thinking that, what, girls can't do all that, but I beg to differ. I was happy, and I really enjoyed it. I was my dad's son, and we were best friends. However, one day, something happened that made me think about who I really was. On that day, I'd gone to the swimming pool to break my own record in the 100-meter swim. I'd already swum half the distance when I suddenly saw a guy struggling in the water. He seemed like he was drowning. He didn't even have enough strength to swim to the poolside, and he started coming up for air less and less often. I immediately swam up to him and pulled him out. "Thank you. It looks like you've saved me. I don't swim very well," he said. We sat together on the edge of the pool, and I waited for him to recover. He was actually really funny. He was sincere and open, and, well, that's how we met. The guy's name was Shannon, and he turned out to be really outgoing. We chatted for maybe an hour, and I forgot why I'd even come to the pool in the first place. Before leaving, we exchanged numbers, and we agreed to call each other later on. To be honest, that whole event shocked me. I'd never had anything even close to a boyfriend before. My friends in the judo club were just my fighting partners. But suddenly I felt something new for Shannon that I'd never felt before. This was the first time I ever felt like a girl. We started texting and then calling each other. And after a while, I invited him to the movies. Shannon agreed, of course. And I was a little worried because this would be my first date. But what troubled me the most was keeping everything hidden from my dad. After all, if he found out that I was doing some girly nonsense, he'd probably be really upset. But even knowing that, I still really wanted to go out with Shannon. That's why I took my sister's makeup and her best dress. I did my makeup as best I could and threw everything in my purse. Then, I slipped out my window and ran to my date. When Shannon saw me, he started laughing and said, "It's like you're wearing makeup for the first time." I mean, that was true, but I wasn't gonna tell him that. I kinda thought he wouldn't notice all the makeup I'd put on at all, but Shannon said he could fix it. He wiped off all the makeup from my face, took the cosmetics out of my purse, and put it all on again. It felt so good when he touched my face that I just completely relaxed. When Shannon finished, I looked in the mirror and I barely recognized myself. A beautiful young woman was looking back at me. How had he done this? I was starting to like him more and more by the minute. We went to the cinema and we had a great time. And at some point in the evening, I suggested we meet again another time. And he said yes. And that's how I started sneaking out with Shannon. I spent more and more time in front of a mirror and less in the garage with my motorcycle. I wanted Shannon to like me, so I started learning to take care of myself. It seemed like I was doing something right because Shannon and I were getting so much closer. However, there was something about him that I just couldn't put my finger on. I hoped that I would find out what it was eventually. One day, my father was going fishing and, as usual, invited me along. The timing was awful. I had a date that evening, so I had to lie. I said that the motorcycle's carburetor was acting up and had to be fixed, so I'd probably spend the whole day in the garage. Dad smiled, praised me, and left. I felt kind of ashamed, but I also really wanted to meet Shannon. However, that day just really wasn't my day. Shannon and I were wandering around the city, going to cafes, and I suggested that he walk me home. Shannon happily agreed. We were almost at my door when all of a sudden, Dad's car came around the corner. He wasn't supposed to be back until the next day, though. I found out later that some urgent business at work had turned up, so he turned back halfway through. Anyway, he saw me in my sister's dress with my full face of makeup on, and, on top of everything else, with a guy. Dad looked really surprised at first, and then suddenly turned extremely sad and walked home in silence. Shoot. I think I really upset him. Dad was lost in thought and kept quiet the whole evening. We didn't talk about what had happened, but it was bothering me a lot. I kept thinking, what did I do wrong? I'm just dating a guy like all girls do. It's normal. Yeah, my dad and I were best friends and I liked men's hobbies, but I also wanted to have a boyfriend. What was so wrong with that? So I kept dating Shannon. Only I no longer tried to hide that I was putting on makeup or dressing up for my dad. He was still being really quiet, and to be honest, I felt so guilty. One day, everything came to a sudden end. Shannon showed up to our date, looking really sad. I kept asking what had happened, but he just said that we should break up. I couldn't believe my ears. Why? What is this? Everything was going so well. Shannon said that he had a secret he couldn't tell me because if I found out, I wouldn't want to see him anymore. He apologized and he left. I stood on the street and I just couldn't believe what had happened. This was so unexpected. I didn't leave my room for several days and I just kept thinking about it. What was the secret that made Shannon decide to end our relationship? I had no clue. I just felt sad, and I waited for him to text me. After a while, I finally started to feel a little bit better and I decided to move on. I put on a pair of dirty jeans and went out to the garage to fix the motorcycle's carburetor. I figured destiny itself was telling me to. I was working in the garage when I saw that my dad was going fishing again. I remembered that it had been a long time since we'd gone fishing together, so I asked if I could come along. Dad smiled and he agreed. It made me feel a lot better that we were still friends. We were chatting merrily about fishing baits along the way, but I still felt like I needed to discuss what had happened. So, when we got into the boat and swam out into the middle of the bay, I couldn't bear it any longer and I just said it. I'm sorry I lied to you, and I'm sorry that I upset you by dating a guy, I said. Dad told me he wasn't angry with me, and that he'd known it would happen one day. He just hadn't thought it would come so soon. That's why he'd been thinking so much lately.
It's my own fault. I was putting too much pressure on you. You can date whoever you want and do whatever you want. The most important thing is for you to be happy,
he said tenderly. I hugged my dad. He was my very best friend, and I was so glad that we'd made up. Heck, he was probably the best dad ever. We had a great time fishing, and we came home after dark. But as soon as I got out of the car, a commotion at the end of the street caught my attention. A group of local thugs was bullying someone under a streetlight. I was curious, so I decided to see what was happening. As soon as I got closer, I noticed that Shannon was in the crowd. He already looked super beaten up, and a few guys looked like they were ready to add some more bruises to the pile. But what was he doing here? Hey, leave him alone, I shouted. The thugs turned around and saw me. One of them chuckled and told me to go away before they beat me up as well. Well, they didn't really know who they were messing with, did they? My judo classes really came in handy at this moment. And in just a few seconds, all of the thugs were laying on the ground and groaning miserably. I hugged my boyfriend, and I led him away. Shannon, what are you doing here? I asked, surprised. He told me that breaking up with me had been a mistake. He missed me, and he'd come to talk to me. Shannon said he would tell me his secret and let me decide whether or not I would stay with him. Before anything was even said, I just knew this would be important. It turns out that my boyfriend had 2 older brothers, and when his mother got pregnant for a 3rd time, she'd really wanted it to be a girl to have someone to pamper. But Shannon was born instead, and so his mother decided to raise him like a daughter. That's why he didn't know how to fight. He liked to cook, and he knew everything there was to know about makeup. Shannon realized that girls didn't like guys like him, and he thought I would be disappointed if he told me the truth. But he realized that he really loved me, so he thought he would tell me and let me make the decision. So, after all this, it turned out that my boyfriend and I had more in common than I had ever thought. And his secret only made me love him more. I smiled and I said that I had a secret as well. I like fighting, riding motorcycles, and fishing. And if that doesn't disappoint you, then I'd love to keep dating you. Yeah, so that's my story. We've started seeing each other again. Sometimes I even come to our dates on a motorcycle in my dirty jeans. And my boyfriend started baking me his specialty fish pie. Well, what do you think of our unusual coupling? Please tell me in the comments below. And one last piece of advice. After all this, there's one thing that I really, truly realized. You can only be happy when you're being your true self.